My wife was away when my 6-year-old daughter whispered in my ear, "Dad, don't sleep. Someone's here." I was confused and asked, "What do you mean?" She put her finger to her lips and said, "Shoo." Then I heard footsteps slowly coming closer through the hall. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Russell Cain pulled the dinosaur print blanket up to his daughter's chin and smoothed it against her small frame. Myra's dark eyes watched him with an intensity that always caught him off guard. At 6 years old, she had a way of looking at people like she could see straight through to their bones. "One more story, Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of Brinley's footsteps in the master bedroom down the hall. "Not tonight, sweetheart. You need sleep." Russell kissed her forehead and tasted the faint scent of strawberry shampoo. "Tomorrow we'll build that fort you've been asking about." Myra's fingers found his wrist and gripped tight. Her voice dropped even lower. "Don't sleep, Daddy. Someone's here when you're asleep." The words hit him like ice water. Russell kept his expression neutral, a skill learned in too many war zones where showing fear meant death. "What do you mean, someone's here?" "When you're sleeping. In the house." Myra's eyes darted toward the hallway. They walk around. Russell's training kicked in. He spoke in the same calm tone he used when explaining why she couldn't have ice cream for breakfast. "Who walks around, Myra?" "I don't know, but they're quiet. Like they don't want you to hear." Before Russell could ask more, Brinley's voice carried from their bedroom. "Russell, can you help me with this suitcase?" He squeezed Myra's hand. "We'll talk more tomorrow, okay? Lock your door after I leave." Myra nodded, but her grip didn't loosen. "Promise you won't sleep deep?" "I promise." Russell walked down the hall, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. Their house in Flagstaff was small but well organized, every surface clean and everything in its proper place. Too clean, sometimes. Like a showroom where real people weren't supposed to live. Brinley stood beside their king-sized bed, folding clothes into an expensive leather suitcase. At 33, she still had the lean build of the yoga instructor she'd been when they met 8 years ago. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, and her makeup remained flawless even at 9 o'clock at night. "The zipper stuck," she said without looking up. Russell examined the suitcase. The zipper moved smoothly when he tested it. "Seems fine to me." "Well, it wasn't working before." Brinley's tone carried that edge he'd been hearing more often lately. Sharp enough to cut, but delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. "How long is this retreat again?" Russell asked, watching her fold a silk blouse with practiced precision. 2 weeks. Maybe 3 if I decide to stay for the extended program." She glanced at him. "Dr. Martinez says trauma recovery can't be rushed." Russell nodded. Brinley had been seeing Dr. Martinez for 6 months, ever since her mother's death in a car accident. The therapist specialized in grief counseling, and Brinley claimed the sessions helped. But Russell had noticed she seemed more distant after each appointment, not less. "Will you call every night?" "Myra likes hearing your voice before bed." "Of course." Brinley's smile looked practiced, though the retreat has limited phone access. Part of the healing process. "Right." Russell picked up one of her scarves, a blue silk square he'd bought her for their anniversary 2 years ago. She hadn't worn it since. "This place is in Sedona, Phoenix." The Sedona location was booked. She took the scarf from his hands and placed it carefully in the suitcase. "I left the address and phone number on the kitchen counter." Russell had memorized both that morning. A quick internet search revealed the facility existed and offered trauma counseling. Everything appeared legitimate, but something in Brinley's manner felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation. "I'll miss you," he said, testing her reaction. "I'll miss you too." The words came out flat, automatic. Brinley closed the suitcase and set it beside the dresser. "Myra asleep?" "Just tuck her in." "Good. I want to get an early start tomorrow." Brinley moved to the bathroom and began her nightly routine of expensive creams and serums. Russell sat on the bed and watched her in the mirror. "She's been having some interesting dreams lately." "Oh!" Brinley's hand paused for a fraction of a second before continuing to apply moisturizer. "Says she hears people walking around the house at night. Kids have active imaginations." Brinley's reflection met his eyes. Maybe she's watching too much television. Maybe. Russell lay back against his pillow, though she seemed pretty specific about it. Specific how? So they're quiet. Like they don't want to be heard. Brinley finished her routine and turned off the bathroom light. I'm sure it's nothing. Children process stress in strange ways. What stress? Your deployment ended less than a year ago, Russell. She's still adjusting to having you home. Brinley slipped into bed beside him, but stayed on her side, facing away. We all are. Russell stared at the ceiling. His last deployment to Afghanistan had ended 10 months ago, and the transition back to civilian life hadn't been smooth. Starting his custom tactical gear business helped, but the income remained unpredictable. Money was tight, though not desperately so. But Myra had never shown signs of stress about his return. If anything, she seemed happier and more secure with him home. The walking sound she described didn't match the pattern of a child processing deployment anxiety. Brinley, when you get back from the retreat, maybe we should talk about seeing a family counselor. All three of us together. Silence stretched between them. When Brinley finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Let's see how the retreat goes first. Russell listened to her breathing, gradually slow into sleep. Then he listened to the house. The old walls creaked as they cooled from the day's heat. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Wind moved through the pine trees outside their window, normal sounds. House sounds, but Myra had heard something else. The red numbers on Russell's alarm clock read 2:13 a.m. when the sound woke him. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway outside the bedroom. Not the quick patter of Myra's bare feet or the familiar rhythm of Brinley getting up for water. These footsteps belonged to someone larger. Someone trying to move quietly. Russell's body went still, every sense sharpening to combat alertness. In Afghanistan, this level of awareness had kept him alive through 16 months of roadside bombs and sniper fire. His hand moved slowly toward the baseball bat he kept beside the bed. The footsteps stopped. Russell waited, counting his heartbeats. 30 seconds. 60. Nothing. His bedroom door opened with the faintest whisper of hinges. Myra's silhouette appeared in the doorway, her stuffed elephant clutched against her chest. She moved like a ghost, her bare feet completely silent on the hardwood. She climbed into bed beside him without a word and pressed one small finger to her lips. Her dark eyes were wide, but not panicked. Alert, Russell nodded and slipped out of bed, grabbing the flashlight from his nightstand and the aluminum baseball bat. Brinley didn't stir. She'd always been a heavy sleeper, but her stillness seemed almost too complete. The hallway stretched before him, empty and dark. Russell moved with the systematic precision of room-clearing drills, checking corners and sight lines like he was back in Fallujah. The bathroom was empty. Myra's room was empty. The guest room at the end of the hall was empty. He checked the living room, kitchen, and dining area. Nothing out of place. No signs of forced entry. All windows were locked from the inside. But when Russell checked the security system panel beside the front door, his blood went cold. The motion sensors for the interior of the house showed a 7-minute gap between 2:10 and 2:17 a.m. The system's status read manual override. Someone had disabled the sensors from inside the house. Russell scrolled through the system's log. The override had been entered using the master code, the one only he and Brinley knew. But Brinley was asleep in their bed. He'd felt her breathing, seen her still form under the blankets. He reactivated the sensors and returned to the bedroom. Myra was sitting up in bed, watching the doorway. "Did you see anyone?" she whispered. Russell sat beside her and spoke quietly. "No, but you were right to come get me. They were in the kitchen." "How do you know?" "The floor squeaks by the sink." 3 squeaks, then nothing. Russell knew that squeak. The subflooring had warped slightly where a pipe had leaked years ago. You had to step in exactly the right spot to make that particular sound. "Myra, how many times have you heard people walking around?" She held up 4 fingers. "This is the 4th. Always at night. Always when you're sleeping. Never when mommy's gone." Russell processed this information. Brinley traveled occasionally for her part-time work with a yoga studio, teaching workshops in other cities. If Myra was right, the intruder only came when Brinley was home. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Myra's voice was barely audible. Mommy said you'd be angry. She said it was probably just the house settling and I shouldn't bother you. Another piece clicked into place. Brinley had known about the footsteps, known and dismissed them without investigating. You can always tell me things like this, Russell said, even if Mommy says not to. Okay. Myra nodded and curled against his side. Can I sleep here? Yes. Russell lay awake until dawn, listening. But whoever had been their house was gone, leaving behind only disabled sensors and the growing certainty that nothing in his life was what it seemed. Russell stood in his workshop behind the house, examining the security system's data logs on his laptop. Brinley had left 2 hours ago for her retreat, kissing him goodbye with the same practiced smile she'd been wearing for months. The motion sensor data revealed a pattern that made his stomach clench. Over the past 6 weeks, the sensors had been manually disabled 12 times, always between 2 o'clock and 4 a.m., always for periods of 15 to 30 minutes. He'd been so focused on his business, designing custom holsters and tactical gear for law enforcement, that he'd missed the signs. But now, looking back with a soldier's eye for detail, the anomalies were everywhere. Brinley always forgot to turn the security cameras back on after her Tuesday evening yoga classes. The cameras faced the driveway and front entrance, but she claimed the blinking lights bothered her meditation practice point 3 weeks ago. She'd started taking sleeping pills for stress. She'd mentioned it casually, like it was no more significant than switching shampoo brands. But the pills knocked her out completely, making her dead to the world between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And then there was the burner phone. Russell had found it 2 days ago while fixing a loose floorboard in the guest bathroom. Someone had taped it to the underside of the sink cabinet, wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. A cheap flip phone with a local number and 3 contacts saved in the memory. He'd photographed everything before putting it back exactly where he'd found it. The 3 contacts were listed only as B, C, and work. Now Russell opened his laptop and began documenting everything with the same methodical approach he'd used for mission reports in the Army. Dates, times, details, and photographs. If something was happening in his house, he'd need evidence to prove it. The sound of Myra's feet on the workshop steps interrupted his work. She appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 peanut butter sandwiches and a juice box. Lunch, she announced, setting the food on his workbench. Thank you. Russell saved his files and closed the laptop. How are you feeling with Mommy gone? Myra climbed onto a stool beside him and bit into her sandwich. Better. Better how? The house feels different. Quieter. She swallowed and looked at him seriously. Daddy, can I tell you something? Always. There's a man with a blue hat. He comes when Mommy thinks you're busy. Russell kept his voice level. What does this man look like? Tall. Brown hair. He has muscles like you, but smaller. Myra traced patterns on the workbench with her finger. He talks to Mommy in the kitchen. What do they talk about? I don't know. They use quiet voices. But sometimes Mommy laughs the way she does when she thinks something is funny, but she doesn't want you to know. Russell knew that laugh. He'd heard it during phone calls she thought he couldn't overhear. Short and sharp, with an edge of secrecy. Does this man ever see you? No. I hide in the closet in the hall. There's a space behind the winter coats where I can see through the crack in the door. Smart girl. Russell felt pride and heartbreak in equal measure. No 6-year-old should need to hide in closets to feel safe in her own home. Myra, I need you to listen carefully. If you ever see this man again, I want you to come find me immediately. Don't hide in the closet. Come straight to me. Can you do that? What if you're sleeping? Wake me up. What if you're in the shower? Come anyway. What if? No matter what I'm doing, come find me. Russell took her small hands in his. You're the most important thing in the world to me. Nothing else matters as much as keeping you safe. Myra nodded solemnly. Daddy, do you think Mommy knows about the blue hat man? The question hung in the workshop, air like smoke. Russell looked into his daughter's eyes and saw an intelligence that cut straight to the heart of things. She'd already figured out more than she was saying. What do you think? He asked. I think she likes him better than us. The words hit Russell like a physical blow, but not because they were cruel, because they were probably true. Russell took Myra hiking in the Coconino National Forest, following trails that wound through stands of ponderosa pine and patches of golden aspen. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and mountain earth. They'd been walking for an hour when Myra found a fallen log beside a small creek and declared it the perfect spot for lunch. Russell spread out a blanket and unpacked sandwiches, trail mix, and 2 bottles of water. "Daddy," Myra swung her legs from the log, her hiking boots barely reaching the ground. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Did you ever talk to someone when I wasn't home?" The question was too casual, too carefully phrased. Russell recognized his own interrogation techniques reflected back at him through a 6-year-old's voice. "Like who?" "I don't know. Just someone." Russell unwrapped his sandwich and considered his response. Myra was testing him, trying to understand if the behavior she'd observed was normal. He decided on honesty. "No. The only people I talk to when you're not home are delivery drivers and maybe your Uncle Darian on the phone." Myra nodded and bit into her sandwich. "What does Mommy say about me when I'm not here?" Another carefully crafted question. Russell's chest tightened. "What do you mean? Like when I'm at school or playing outside? What does she tell you about me?" "She says you're smart and creative. She worries about you being too serious sometimes." Russell watched Myra's face. "What does Mommy say about me when I'm not here?" Myra's feet stopped swinging. She stared at the creek water flowing over smooth rocks. "She says you don't matter anymore. But I think you do." The words cut deep, but Russell kept his expression neutral. "When does she say things like that?" "Sometimes on the phone. Sometimes to the blue hat man." Myra looked up at him. "She says you're not strong like you used to be. She says you're broken from a war." Russell set down his sandwich. "Do you think I'm broken?" "No. You're different from other daddies, but not broken. You notice things. You listen. You don't get mad about little stuff." Myra picked up a pine cone and examined it carefully. "Mommy gets mad about little stuff." "Like what?" "Like when I leave my backpack by the door instead of hanging it up. Or when you forget to put your coffee cup in the dishwasher." She doesn't yell, but her voice gets sharp, like she's cutting something. Russell knew that voice. It had been directed at him more and more frequently over the past year. Small criticisms delivered with surgical precision, each one designed to highlight his failures as a husband and father. "Myra, has Mommy ever said anything about me going away?" The question slipped out before Russell could stop it. But Myra's reaction told him everything he needed to know. Her small body went very still, and her eyes darted to his face. "She says sometimes people need space to figure out who they really are." "Did she say I need space?" "She says maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. Somewhere you could be a soldier again instead of trying to be a regular person." Russell felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Brinley was already preparing Myra for his absence, planting seeds that would make his disappearance seem like his choice, his failure to adapt to civilian life. "What do you think about that?" he asked. Myra threw the pine cone into the creek and watched it float away. "I think you're happiest when we're together. Like right now. You don't look like you want to be somewhere else." "I don't." "Good." Myra leaned against his shoulder. "Because I need you here. The house is scary without you." Russell wrapped his arm around her and stared into the forest. Somewhere back in Flagstaff, his wife was at a trauma retreat that probably didn't exist, and a man in a blue hat was likely going through his house, learning his routines and vulnerabilities. But here, sitting beside a mountain creek with his daughter, Russell felt the first stirrings of something he hadn't experienced since Afghanistan. The cold, calculating awareness that came before mission. He was at war again. But this time, the enemy wasn't wearing a uniform, and the battlefield was his own home. Russell waited until Myra was asleep before making the call. He sat in his workshop with the door locked and his laptop open to an encrypted messaging program he'd used during his military service. Darian Ames answered on the second ring. "This is unexpected. How's civilian life treating you, cousin?" "I need help." Russell skipped the pleasantries. In Afghanistan, he and Darian had developed a shorthand that cut straight to the essential information. "Someone's been in my house. Multiple times. I think my wife is involved." The line went quiet for several seconds. When Darian spoke again, his voice was sharp and focused. "Tell me everything." Russell laid out the facts systematically. The disabled security sensors, the burner phone, Myra's observations about the blue hat man, Brinley's behavior changes, and the convenient timing of her retreat. "You still have that phone?" Darian asked. "It's back where I found it." I didn't want to tip anyone off. Smart. What about security cameras? External only, and Brinley's been turning them off regularly. Claims the lights bother her meditation. Right. Russell could hear typing in the background. I can be there tomorrow night. We'll set up a surveillance grid that would make the NSA jealous. Darian worked for a cybersecurity firm in Phoenix, but his real expertise came from 8 years as a signals intelligence analyst for the Army. If anyone could turn Russell's house into an impenetrable monitoring station, it was his cousin. What are you thinking for deployment? Russell asked. Micro cameras in the common areas, hidden where your wife won't think to look. Audio pickups with voice isolation. Motion detectors that feed to a secure server instead of your home system. All of it invisible to casual inspection. And if she's really planning something, then we'll have everything documented in real time. Video, audio, digital footprints, financial transactions. The whole package. Darian paused. Russell, if this goes where I think it's going, you need to be prepared for the fallout. I know. Do you? Because taking down a spouse isn't like taking down an enemy combatant. This is going to get ugly in ways that have nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with family court and public opinion. Russell looked through the workshop window at the house where his daughter was sleeping. She's already decided I don't matter. The only question is how far she's willing to go to prove it. All right, I'll drive up after work tomorrow with a van full of equipment. We'll spend the weekend turning your house into Fort Knox. But Russell, yeah, whatever happens, don't confront her directly until we have everything documented. If she's planning what I think she's planning, showing your hand too early could be dangerous. Russell thought about the burner phone and the sleeping pills and the insurance policy he'd found buried in Brinley's desk drawer just that afternoon. A policy he didn't remember signing, with a beneficiary designation that made his stomach turn. I'll wait, he said, but not for long. After ending the call, Russell sat in the dark workshop and planned. In Afghanistan, successful missions required 3 things: superior intelligence, tactical advantage, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment came that he was about to get the intelligence. Soon, he'd have the tactical advantage. The willingness to act had never been a problem. The footage was crystal clear. Russell sat in his workshop at 3:47 a.m., watching a man with brown hair and broad shoulders use a spare key to enter his front door. The hidden camera Darian had installed in the pine tree across the street captured every detail, including the blue baseball cap the intruder wore, Calendar. The name had taken Darian less than 2 hours to discover after running the man's face through facial recognition software. 35 years old, personal trainer at CrossFit Flagstaff, and owner of a juvenile record that included breaking and entering. Russell fast-forwarded through 12 minutes of Callan moving through the house like he owned it. Kitchen, living room, guest bedroom. The man knew exactly where to walk to avoid the motion sensors Russell had never disabled. But the audio from the kitchen microphone made Russell's hands clench in a fist that Brinley's voice, clear and cold. He'll be gone soon. He doesn't have the nerve to fight back. Callan's response came through slightly muffled. You sure about that? Guy's special forces or something. Combat medic. And he's not the same person who left for Afghanistan. The war broke something in him. He's too damaged to be a real threat. Russell paused the recording and stared at the laptop screen. 3 years of marriage, and this was what his wife really thought of him. Not just that she wanted him gone, but that he was too broken to stop her that he restarted the audio. What about the kid? Callan asked. What about her? She's smart. Asks a lot of questions. Myra will adjust. Children are resilient. And honestly, she'll be better off without his influence. All that military paranoia and hypervigilance isn't healthy for a developing mind. Russell's vision went white around the edges. They were discussing his daughter like a logistical problem to be solved. When? Callan's voice again. Soon. I need a few more weeks to establish the right narrative. Document his erratic behavior, his drinking, his inability to cope with civilian life. Dr. Martinez is already noting signs of PTSD and depression in my file. Dr. Martinez is in on this. Dr. Martinez believes what I tell him. And what I tell him is that my husband is struggling with suicidal ideation and violent mood swings. The recording continued for another 8 minutes. Plans within plans, each detail calculated to paint Russell as an unstable veteran who'd become a danger to his family. By the time Callan left through the back door, Russell had a complete picture of his wife's strategy. Brinley wasn't just planning to leave him. She was planning to destroy him so completely that he'd never see his daughter again. Russell closed the laptop and walked to the house. Dawn was breaking over the pine trees, and birds were starting their morning songs. Everything looked peaceful and normal, but normal was a lie. Normal was a mask worn by people who planned destruction in the dark that he checked on Myra, still sleeping in her bed with her elephant clutched tight. Then he made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where his wife had discussed his elimination with her lover. The coffee tasted like ash, but Russell drank it anyway. He'd need caffeine for what came next. Darian's fingers moved across his laptop keyboard with surgical precision, diving deep into financial records and credit reports while Russell watched from across the table. They'd been at it for 3 hours, following digital breadcrumbs that painted a picture of systematic fraud. 3 credit cards opened in your name over the past 4 months, Darian said, highlighting entries on the screen. All with different banks, all with statements going to a P.O. box you never opened. Russell leaned forward. What's the total damage? $14,000 in debt so far. But look at what she's buying. Darian pulled up the transaction histories. Sleeping pills, industrial-grade drain cleaner, a shovel, plastic sheeting. And here's the interesting one: a life insurance policy consultation with Mutual Assurance. The blood in Russell's veins turned to ice water. How much life insurance? Still digging, but the consultation fee was for their premium package. That usually means policies starting at $500,000. Russell thought about the insurance documents he'd found in Brinley's desk. The ones with his forged signature and the recent addendum extending coverage for accidental death. There's more, Darian continued. Your wife's been researching suicide methods online, specifically methods that look like accidents. She's also been reading about PTSD symptoms and veteran suicide statistics, building her narrative. Exactly. If something happens to you, she's got months of documented evidence showing a troubled veteran who couldn't adjust to civilian life. Darian turned the laptop screen toward Russell. But here's where she screwed up. All this research is being done from your home computer, using your IP address. She thinks she's being clever, but she's actually creating a digital trail that leads straight back to her. Russell studied the browser history. Searches for PTSD suicide methods, accidental death insurance claims, and how to fake a suicide note. Mixed in with the research were visits to dating sites and real estate listings in Phoenix. She's already planning her new life. With Calendar, I found text messages between them going back 6 months. They're not just having an affair, Russell. They're planning a future together using your life insurance money. Darian opened another file. And here's the really sick part. She's been documenting fake incidents of domestic violence. Photos of bruises she gave herself, diary entries describing your supposed angry outbursts, even a recording of herself crying and claiming you threatened her. Russell's hands clenched involuntarily. I've never laid a finger on her. I know, but if something happens to you, all this evidence will surface during the investigation. The grieving widow who was trapped in an abusive marriage with a violent veteran. She'll get sympathy, insurance money, and custody of Myra. Not custody, full custody. I found papers in her desk. She's planning to petition the court to declare me an unfit parent. Darian saved all the files to an encrypted drive. We've got enough to destroy her, Russell. Financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment. She'll go to prison for decades. Good. Russell felt no satisfaction, only cold determination. What else do you need? More recordings. I want everything documented in real time. Her conversations with Callan, her meetings with whoever's helping her forge documents, and especially any attempt to carry out her plan. Russell nodded. In Afghanistan, gathering intelligence was only the first phase of an operation. Now came the hard part, waiting for the enemy to reveal themselves completely before striking. One more thing, Darian said. I ran a background check on Dr. Martinez. He's legitimate, but he's also young and inexperienced. Brinley's been feeding him a carefully constructed story about your mental health, and he's been documenting everything she tells him. Can we get his files? Working on it. But Russell, you need to understand something. Even when we expose all this, the damage to your reputation might be permanent. People will remember the accusations even after they're proven false. Russell thought about Myra sleeping upstairs, trusting him to keep her safe. My reputation isn't what matters here. Fair enough. But promise me something. When this goes down, let the system handle it. Don't take justice into your own hands. Russell met his cousin's eyes. I'll do whatever's necessary to protect my daughter. That's not a promise. No, it's not. Brinley returned from her retreat on a Tuesday morning, her face glowing with what she claimed was inner peace. She hugged Myra and kissed Russell's cheek, her performance flawless. How was it? Russell asked, watching her unpack clothes that didn't look like they'd been worn. Transformative. Dr. Hamilton helped me understand how trauma affects family dynamics. Brinley folded a shirt with precise movements. I think I've been enabling some unhealthy patterns. What kind of patterns? Your anger, for one thing. I've been walking on eggshells instead of addressing it directly. Russell paused. My anger. Russell, you raised your voice at Myra 3 times last week. She was terrified. The accusation hit like a slap. Russell had never raised his voice at his daughter. Ever. When did I yell at her? Monday morning, when she spilled juice on your work papers. Wednesday, when she interrupted your phone call. Friday, when she couldn't find her shoes. Brinley's voice was patient, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. Russell stared at his wife. None of those incidents had happened. Brinley, I never. This is exactly what Dr. Hamilton warned me about. Trauma victims often have memory gaps around their aggressive episodes. I don't have memory gaps. That's what makes them gaps, honey. Brinley touched his arm with false sympathy. You're not fully aware of how your behavior affects us. Over the next 3 days, the psychological attacks escalated. Brinley would find broken plates in the kitchen and claim Russell had thrown them during a drunken rage. She'd show him text messages on her phone that supposedly came from him, threatening and paranoid messages he'd never sent. Look at this, she said Thursday evening, holding up her phone. You sent this at 2 in the morning. Russell read the message. I know what you're doing. Stop lying to me or you'll regret it. I didn't send that. Russell, it's from your number. Then someone else sent it using my number. It's not difficult to spoof. Brinley's expression grew concerned. Honey, this paranoid thinking is exactly what worries me. Now you think someone is impersonating you. Russell felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Each denial made him sound more unstable. Each explanation more paranoid. Brinley was a master at this game, twisting reality until he questioned his own memory. But the hidden cameras were recording everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment of calculated cruelty. Friday night, Brinley invited her sister over for dinner. Ashley arrived with wine and sympathy, ready to console her sister who was married to an increasingly unstable veteran. Russell played his part, letting them think their strategy was working. He stayed quiet during dinner, letting Brinley dominate the conversation with stories about his supposed mood swings and angry outbursts. I found these hidden around the house, Brinley told Ashley, producing bottles of whiskey that Russell had never purchased. He's been drinking in secret. That's so sad, Ashley replied, shooting Russell pitying glances. Have you thought about an intervention? Dr. Martinez thinks he needs intensive treatment. But Russell refuses to admit there's a problem. Russell excused himself and went to his workshop, where Darian was monitoring the audio feeds in real time. She's good, Darian said grimly. If I didn't know the truth, I'd believe her completely. How much more do we need? Not much. She's building towards something. All this psychological preparation is leading to an endgame. Russell watched his wife on the video monitor, performing her role as the suffering spouse with Academy Award precision. She thinks she's won already. Let her think that. Overconfidence makes people sloppy. But Russell wasn't feeling patient anymore. Every lie Brinley told about him was poison in his daughter's environment. Every day this continued was another day Myra had to live in a house filled with deception and manipulation. How long until we have enough evidence to end this? Darian checked his computer screens, which showed audio levels, video feeds, and data streams from a dozen hidden devices. Soon, she's escalating. When people escalate, they make mistakes. Russell hoped his cousin was right, because the cold anger in his chest was growing stronger every day, and his patience was wearing thin. Russell studied his reflection in the bathroom mirror and made a decision. If Brinley wanted to see him broken, he'd give her a performance she'd never forget. He stopped shaving. After 3 days, his face carried the scruffy, unkempt look of a man losing control. He started leaving dishes in the sink and clothes on the bedroom floor, small signs of deterioration that Brinley would notice and document. The fake drinking was trickier. Russell would pour whiskey down the sink while running water to mask the sound, then leave the bottle conspicuously on the counter. He practiced stumbling slightly when Brinley was watching, and developed a technique for making his eyes look bloodshot using eye drops. "Russell, have you been drinking?" Brinley asked Wednesday evening, finding him sitting in the living room with an empty glass and the smell of alcohol on his breath. He'd splashed whiskey on his shirt for authenticity. "Just a couple." Russell let his words slur slightly. "Bad day at work." "What happened at work?" "Lost a big contract. Client said my designs were sloppy." Russell had actually landed a new contract that week, but Brinley wouldn't verify his story. "Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Brinley's expression was perfect, concerned on the surface, satisfied underneath. "Oh, honey, I'm sure it's just a rough patch." "Is it? Everything I touch turns to shit lately. Business, marriage, fatherhood." Russell dropped his head into his hands. "Maybe I should just disappear. You and Myra would be better off." "Don't say that." But Brinley's voice carried no real alarm. If anything, she sounded encouraged. Russell sent carefully crafted text messages to himself using a second phone, creating a digital trail of depression and suicidal ideation. Messages that said things like "can't do this anymore" and "everyone would be happier without me." He made sure Brinley found these messages by leaving his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. "Russell, I saw your texts," she said the next morning. "I think you should talk to someone." "Like who?" "Dr. Martinez has experience with veteran mental health issues. I could arrange an appointment." Russell pretended to consider this. "Maybe, but what's the point? I'm broken, Brinley. The war broke something in me that can't be fixed." "You're not broken." The words were automatic, empty of conviction. Brinley was building a case, documenting his decline for future use. Meanwhile, Darian was capturing everything. The stage performances, the fake evidence, and most importantly, Brinley's reactions. Her satisfaction when Russell appeared to spiral. Her careful notes about his behavior. Her phone calls to Callan where she described the plan's progress. "He's falling apart faster than we expected," she told Callan during one recorded conversation. "Dr. Martinez is documenting everything. When this is over, no one will question what happened." Russell maintained his performance for 2 weeks. Disheveled appearance, fake drinking, stage depression. All of it logged, time-stamped, and mirrored to Darian's secure servers as evidence of Brinley's manipulation. But the hardest part was watching how his supposed breakdown affected Myra. His daughter grew quieter, more watchful. She started avoiding him when Brinley was around, playing her own role in the family's dysfunction. One night, after Brinley was asleep, Myra crept into his workshop. "Daddy, are you really sad?" Russell pulled her onto his lap and spoke quietly. "No, sweetheart. I'm pretending to be sad so Mommy thinks her plan is working." "What plan?" "A very bad plan. But don't worry. It's not going to work." Myra nodded solemnly. "Can I stop pretending to be scared of you?" Russell's heart broke a little. Even at 6 years old, Myra had understood the performance required of her. "When we're alone, you never have to pretend anything." "Good. I don't like pretending you're scary." "You're not scary at all." Russell held his daughter close and promised himself that this charade would end soon. Brinley thought she was watching him disintegrate, but she was actually documenting her own crimes. The trap was almost ready. The tea tasted bitter. Russell sat across from Brinley at their kitchen table, holding a cup of chamomile tea she'd prepared to help him relax. The bitter taste was wrong. Chamomile should be mild and floral, not sharp with a chemical aftertaste. Drink up, Brinley said, sipping from her own cup. Dr. Martinez says herbal tea can help with anxiety. Russell pretended to drink while watching his wife. She seemed nervous tonight, checking her phone repeatedly and glancing toward the front door, waiting for something or someone. I think I'll take this up to bed, Russell said, standing with his half-full cup. Finish it here. It works better when it's hot. The insistence confirmed his suspicions. Russell sat back down and raised the cup to his lips, but didn't swallow. Instead, he waited for Brinley to look at her phone again, then quickly switched their cups. Brinley didn't notice. She was too focused on typing a message, probably to Callan. There, Russell said, draining what had been her cup. Feel better already. Brinley looked up and smiled. Good. Why don't you go upstairs and rest? I'll clean up down here. Russell climbed the stairs, but stopped on the landing, listening. Within minutes, he heard the front door open and Callan's voice in the kitchen. Did he drink it? Every drop. Should take about 20 minutes to kick in fully. And then we staged the accident. Bathtub like we discussed. Depressed veteran slips and hits his head. Tragic, but not surprising given his recent behavior. Russell's blood went cold. They weren't just planning to drug him, they were planning to kill him tonight. He crept back down the stairs and positioned himself where he could see into the kitchen. Brinley was sitting at the table, looking drowsy. The sedatives she'd meant for him were taking effect. I feel strange, she said, blinking slowly. Callan moved to her side. What do you mean strange? Sleepy. Really sleepy. Brinley's words began to slur. Did you put something in the tea? You put something in the tea. For Russell. Callan's voice was sharp with alarm. How much did you drink? Just a sip. Maybe two. Brinley's head lolled forward. I think we switched cups somehow. Russell had heard enough. While Brinley slipped into unconsciousness and Callan panicked, he moved quickly through the house. First, he secured Myra's bedroom door from the outside. She was safe but contained. Then he returned to his workshop and activated every recording device Darian had installed. Everything that happened next will be documented in high definition. Brinley slept for 10 hours. During that time, Russell cloned her phone, downloading every message, photo, and contact. He photographed the contents of her purse, including a detailed handwritten plan for his murder. He accessed her laptop and copied files that contained research on inheritance law, life insurance claims, and child custody procedures. Most damning of all, he found her diary. The entries went back months, chronicling her relationship with Callan and her growing hatred for Russell. Page after page of toxic thoughts about her husband and plans for their future together. When he's gone, I get the money, the house, and Myra. She'll learn to love Callan. Russell is weak, too damaged from the war to be a real father. Myra needs a strong male role model. Dr. Martinez believes everything I tell him. By the time this is over, everyone will see Russell as the unstable veteran who couldn't handle civilian life. Russell photographed every page, every sick fantasy, every cold calculation. Then he put everything back exactly where he'd found it. When Brinley woke up the next morning, groggy and confused, Russell was sitting in the kitchen reading a newspaper like nothing had happened. How are you feeling? He asked. Terrible. Like I got hit by a truck. Brinley rubbed her temples. What happened last night? You fell asleep at the kitchen table. I carried you up to bed. I don't remember that. You were pretty out of it. Maybe you're coming down with something. Brinley looked around the kitchen, searching for signs of what had really happened. But Russell had cleaned everything, removed all evidence of Callan's presence. Did anyone come by last night? Not that I know of. Why? I thought I heard voices. Probably the neighbors. The Johnsons were having a party. The Johnsons lived 3 houses down and hadn't had a party in months. But Brinley's confusion made her susceptible to suggestion. Russell watched his wife struggle to piece together the previous evening and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She'd made a crucial mistake, and now he had everything he needed to destroy her. The war was almost over. Russell sat across from Lenora Gall in her law office in downtown Flagstaff, a stack of documents and flash drives spread across her mahogany desk. At 41, Lenora had the sharp eyes and predatory smile of someone who'd built her reputation by annihilating her opponents in family court. "This is impressive work," she said, scrolling through the video evidence on her laptop. "Comprehensive, methodical, legally admissible. Your wife picked the wrong veteran to mess with. What's our position? Unassailable. You've documented conspiracy to commit murder, attempted poisoning, identity theft, insurance fraud, and child endangerment. The prosecution will be lining up to cut deals with her accomplice just to avoid trial." Lenora, open another file. "But I'm more interested in the custody angle. These recordings of her discussing your daughter like property, planning to replace you with her boyfriend, no family court judge will let her within 100 miles of that child. How quickly can we move? I've already prepared the emergency custody filings. We can have them submitted within the hour." Lenora's smile was razor sharp. "But Russell, I need to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? This will be scorched earth. Your wife will be destroyed publicly, criminally, and financially." Russell thought about Myra's whispered warnings, about the insurance policy with his forged signature, about 10 hours of recorded conversation where his wife and her lover planned his murder. "She made her choice when she put my daughter at risk. Fair enough. But understand that this will be a media circus. Veteran exposes wife's murder plot is the kind of story that cable news lives for. Your family's dirty laundry will be public entertainment. As long as Myra is safe, I don't care about the rest." Lenora gathered the documents. "Then let's ruin some lives. I'll file the custody petition this afternoon and arrange for the criminal charges to drop tomorrow morning. Do you have somewhere safe to take your daughter when this hits? My cousin has a place in Phoenix. We can stay there during the arrest and trial." "Good, because once we light this fuse, there's no going back." Russell stood and shook Lenora's hand. There was never any going back. She made sure of that. 2 hours later, Russell was back home, helping Myra pack a suitcase for what he'd told her was a surprise trip to visit Uncle Darian. She chattered excitedly about seeing the city and going to the zoo, unaware that her world was about to change forever. Brinley was at her yoga class, or at least that's where she'd said she was going. More likely, she was with Callan, planning their next move against a husband they thought was spiraling towards self-destruction, that Russell's phone buzzed with a text from Lenora, "Filings complete. Criminal charges will be filed at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Arrest warrants issued for both targets." He typed back, "Understood." Then he turned off his phone and focused on his daughter. Tomorrow would bring chaos, media attention, and the complete destruction of the life they'd built here. But tonight, they were just a father and daughter packing for a trip, and Myra was excited about room service and hotel swimming pools. Russell could give her one more night of innocence before everything changed. Russell kissed Myra goodbye at Darian's apartment in Phoenix, then drove back toward Flagstaff through the desert darkness. According to his phone, it was 9:47 p.m. According to the tracking device Lenora had helped him plant in Brinley's car, she was already at home with Callan. He parked 2 miles from his house and hiked through the forest, approaching from the back where the trees provided cover. The tactical gear he'd worn in Afghanistan felt familiar: night vision goggles, communications equipment, and the comfortable weight of a sidearm he hoped not to use. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was worse. In war, you knew who the enemy was. Russell settled into position 50 yards from his house, behind a fallen ponderosa pine that provided perfect concealment and clear sight lines to all the windows. Darian's cameras gave him interior coverage, but Russell wanted eyes-on confirmation of everything that happened tonight. Through his night vision, the house looked peaceful. Warm light in the kitchen windows, the flicker of the television in the living room. A picture of domestic tranquility hiding murder and betrayal. Russell activated his communication gear and spoke quietly into his headset. "Phoenix Base, this is Overwatch. In position." Darian's voice crackled back. "Copy, Overwatch. Flagstaff PD is standing by 3 minutes out. Legal team is monitoring all feeds. You are cleared to observe and report." "Roger." Through the kitchen window, Russell could see Brinley and Callan sitting at the table where he'd eaten breakfast with his daughter that morning. They were drinking wine, their body language relaxed and celebratory. Russell switched to the audio feed on his phone and listened to their conversation. "Told you he'd break eventually. Brinley was saying. Military guys are all the same. Put them under enough psychological pressure and they crack like eggs. What about the kid? Callan's voice. What about her? She'll adjust. Children are more resilient than people think. But won't she remember her father? Brinley laughed, a sound like glass breaking. She'll remember what I tell her to remember. That her father was sick, that he couldn't handle being a husband and father, that he took the coward's way out. Russell's hands clenched involuntarily. Through his scope, he could see Brinley raise her wine glass in a mock toast. To new beginnings, she said. To getting rid of problems, Callan replied. They clinked glasses, celebrating a murder they thought they'd already committed. So what's the timeline? Callan asked. He should be back from his hiking trip around midnight. Depressed, drunk, ready to end it all. Brinley pulled out her phone and showed Callan something on the screen. I've got the suicide note ready. Downloaded his handwriting font and everything. And the scene. Bathtub. Slip and fall, hits his head on the faucet. The autopsy will show alcohol and sleeping pills in his system. Classic veteran suicide disguised as an accident. Russell felt bile rise in his throat. They'd planned every detail, down to the fake suicide note written in his own handwriting. What if someone questions it? Who's going to question it? I've got months of documented evidence showing his mental decline. Dr. Martinez's files, police reports about his erratic behavior, even testimony from neighbors about his drinking. Brinley took another sip of wine. Plus, everyone knows combat veterans have the highest suicide rates. It's almost expected. Through his earpiece, Russell heard Darian's voice. Jesus Christ. They're actually planning to do it tonight. Russell keyed his mic. Phoenix Base, are you getting all this? Every word. Crystal clear digital audio that will hold up in any court. Darian paused. Police are moving into position now. 2 minutes out. Russell watched Callan stand and pace to the window, looking out at the darkness where Russell was supposedly hiking alone with his demons. I still think we should have done this somewhere else, Callan said. The house feels too obvious. The house is perfect. This is where his life fell apart, where his marriage failed, where he realized he wasn't strong enough to be a real father. Brinley joined him at the window. It's poetic justice. You really hate him, don't you? I hate what he represents. The weakness, the damage, the constant reminder that I settled for less than I deserved. Brinley's reflection was visible in the window glass, her face twisted with contempt. Russell thinks he's some kind of hero because he served his country. But heroes don't come home broken. Heroes don't need their wives to take care of them like children. Russell had heard enough. He keyed his mic again. Phoenix Base, targets are confirmed hostile and discussing imminent crime. Request immediate intervention. Roger, Overwatch. Flagstaff PD is go in 30 seconds. Russell watched through his scope as police cars approached from 3 directions, headlights off, moving with tactical precision. He'd briefed the lead detective personally, sharing everything Lenora had compiled. The officers knew exactly what they were walking into. Callan. Brinley's voice had changed, become sharp with alarm. Do you hear that? Through the audio feed, Russell could hear the faint sound of car doors closing, boots on gravel. Cops, Callan said. Fuck. Someone called the cops. That's impossible. Russell is dead in a ravine somewhere, and no one else knows about. The front door exploded inward, followed by the distinctive sound of police officers announcing themselves. Flagstaff Police. Search warrant. Get on the ground. Russell shifted his position to get a better view of the front of the house. Through his night vision, he could see officers streaming through the door, weapons drawn, shouting commands. The audio feed dissolved into chaos, Brinley screaming, Callan cursing, furniture crashing as they tried to run. But there was nowhere to go. Russell had made sure of that when he'd helped plan the operation. Every exit was covered, every escape route blocked. Callan door. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. Brinley Cain, you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and insurance fraud. Russell watched through his scope as his wife was handcuffed and read her rights. Even in custody, she was still performing, tears streaming down her face as she protested her innocence. I don't understand. What's happening? Where's my husband? But the tears were wasted on the arresting officers. They'd all listened to the recordings of her planning Russell's murder. They knew exactly who they were dealing with. Russell keyed his mic one last time. Phoenix Base, this is Overwatch. Targets are in custody. Package is secure. Copy, Overwatch. Welcome home. Russell packed his gear and hiked back to his truck. By the time he reached Phoenix, Brinley and Callan would be in jail cells, and his daughter would be safe under his sole custody. The war was over. He'd won. The Coconino County Jail smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Russell sat in the small interview room, waiting while Detective Martinez brought Brinley up from her cell. Through the one-way mirror, he could see the booking area where his wife had been processed 6 hours earlier, as she'd requested to see him. Even in custody, even facing murder charges, Brinley believed she could manipulate her way out of trouble. The door opened, and Detective Martinez escorted Brinley into the room. She wore an orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion and made her look older, more fragile. Her makeup was gone, her hair unwashed. For the first time in years, Russell was seeing his wife without her carefully constructed mask. 15 minutes, Detective Martinez said. I'll be right outside. The door closed, leaving Russell alone with the woman who'd planned his murder. Brinley sat across from him and immediately began to cry. Russell, thank God you're alive. I was so worried when the police said you were missing. Russell said nothing. He'd learned the power of silence from interrogating insurgents in Afghanistan. People couldn't stand quiet, and they'd fill it with increasingly desperate lies. I don't understand what's happening, Brinley continued. They're saying I try to hurt you, but that's impossible. I love you. We have problems, but what marriage doesn't? More silence. They have recordings, but they must be fake. Someone is trying to frame me. Brinley's tears looked real, but Russell had seen her practice this performance in the mirror. You know I would never hurt you. You know me better than anyone. Russell finally spoke. I know exactly who you are. The certainty in his voice made Brinley pause. Her tears stopped as abruptly as they'd started. What does that mean? Russell placed a flash drive on the table between them. It means I've been recording everything for 3 weeks. Your conversations with Callan. Your plans to stage my suicide. Your research into insurance fraud and custody law. Brinley's face went very still. You're lying. Audio, video, financial records, text messages, emails. Russell's voice was calm, almost conversational. 10 hours of you discussing the best way to murder me and steal my daughter. That's not. I never. When he's gone, I get the money, the house, and Myra. She'll learn to love Callan. Russell quoted from her diary. Your words, in your handwriting. Brinley's composure cracked completely. The mask slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. You set me up. You set yourself up. I just documented it. No one will believe those recordings. You could have edited them, manipulated them. Russell smiled without warmth. Digital forensics will prove they're authentic. But even if they didn't, you made one crucial mistake. What mistake? You tried to drug me in front of a hidden camera. High-definition video of you putting sleeping pills in my tea, followed by audio of you discussing how to stage my accidental death. Russell leaned forward. That's attempted murder, Brinley. First degree. The color drained from her face. We weren't really going to, it was just talk. Was the insurance policy just talk? The forged documents? The credit cards you opened in my name? Brinley's mouth worked silently, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. You thought I was broken, Russell continued. Too damaged from the war to fight back. But you made a fundamental error in judgment. What error? You assumed that being wounded meant being weak. That having trauma meant being helpless. Russell's voice carried the same cold precision he'd used with enemy prisoners. You're about to learn the difference between being damaged and being destroyed. Russell, please. Think about Myra. She needs her mother. Myra needs to be safe. And she'll never be safe with you in her life. Brinley's last attempt at manipulation collapsed into raw desperation. What do you want? Money? I'll disappear. Never contact you again. You can have everything. I already have everything. Sole custody, the house, the business, and most importantly, the truth about who you really are. Russell stood to leave. Your lawyer will explain the charges. Conspiracy to commit murder attempted poisoning, insurance fraud, identity theft, child endangerment. You're looking at 25 to life. You can't do this to me. Russell paused at the door. I'm not doing anything to you, Brinley. You did this to yourself. He knocked on the door, and Detective Martinez opened it from the outside. We're done here, Russell said. As he walked away, he could hear Brinley screaming behind him, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. But the sound grew fainter with each step until it was just another noise in a place full of people who'd made terrible choices. Russell walked out of the jail and into the Arizona sunshine. Free for the first time in months. 6 months later, Russell sat in the back of the Coconino County Courthouse, watching his wife's trial reach its inevitable conclusion. The media circus Lenora had predicted was in full swing. Reporters packed the gallery. Sketch artists captured every moment, and court TV cameras broadcast the proceedings to a national audience hungry for scandal. The evidence had been overwhelming. Darian's surveillance footage played on loop, showing Brinley and Callan planning Russell's murder in clinical detail. The audio recordings were even more damning, capturing conversations where she discussed inheriting his life insurance money and gaining custody of Myra, the doctor. Martinez had testified for the prosecution, admitting he'd been manipulated by false information about Russell's mental state. The therapist looked shaken as he described how Brinley had systematically constructed a fictional narrative about her husband's instability. She was very convincing, Dr. Martinez said from the witness stand. The documentation she provided, the injuries she claimed to have suffered, the detailed accounts of his supposed violent episodes, it all seemed consistent with combat PTSD. The prosecution had played recordings of Brinley describing her fake bruises and staged evidence. The jury's faces showed disgust as they listened to her cold calculation of each lie. Callan had flipped on his co-conspirator immediately. Faced with murder charges and a recording of himself discussing Russell's elimination, he'd accepted a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. 10 years in prison instead of life. Now he sat in the witness box, describing how Brinley had recruited him for the murder plot. She said her husband was weak, broken from the war, Callan testified. She made it sound like we'd be putting him out of his misery. Did you believe that? The prosecutor asked. At first. But as we planned it out, I realized she just wanted him dead for the money. She didn't care about his suffering. She just wanted him gone. Brinley's defense attorney had tried everything temporary insanity, claiming the recordings were fabricated, arguing that it was all fantasy talk between lovers. But the evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too damning. The prosecutor's closing argument was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the defendant's own words. You've seen her actions captured on video. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was a calculated, methodical plan to murder her husband and steal his child. Brinley Cain didn't just plan to kill Russell Cain. She planned to destroy his reputation, steal his identity, and erase him so completely that his daughter would never know the truth about her father. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Russell didn't attend the sentencing hearing. He'd heard enough of Brinley's voice to last a lifetime. But Lenora called him with the results. 17 years without the possibility of parole, she said. The judge was particularly harsh about the child endangerment charges. She said any mother who would use her daughter as a pawn in a murder plot didn't deserve to breathe free air. Russell felt no satisfaction, only the quiet relief of a war finally ending. What about appeals? She'll try, but the evidence is airtight. Darian's surveillance work was flawless, and her own recordings are beyond dispute. Lenora paused. How's Myra handling all this? Better than expected. She's in therapy, which helps. And she's relieved not to have to pretend anymore. Pretend that she was afraid of me. Brinley had coached her to act scared whenever I was around, to support the narrative about my instability. Jesus, that woman really was a monster. Russell looked out the window of his new house in Prescott, where Myra was building a fort in the backyard. They'd moved here after the trial, away from the media attention and the memories of their old life. She was sick, Russell said finally. But that doesn't excuse what she did. No, it doesn't. But at least it's over now. Russell ended the call and walked outside to help his daughter with her fort. The future stretched ahead of them, clean and open, filled with possibilities that didn't include lies or manipulation or fear. For the first time since Afghanistan, Russell felt truly at peace. 2 years after Brinley's conviction, Russell stood before a group of 30 men and women in a Phoenix community center, sharing his story as part of the Ashline program he'd founded. The nonprofit trained people to recognize psychological abuse and digital manipulation in relationships, using Russell's experience as a case study in survival. The hardest part wasn't the murder plot, he told the audience. It was questioning my own reality. When someone you trust tells you repeatedly that you're broken, that your memories are wrong, that your perceptions can't be trusted eventually, you start to believe them. In the front row, a woman raised her hand. How did you maintain your sanity when everything around you was a lie? I focused on what I could prove. Facts, evidence, documentation. When someone tries to gaslight you, they're essentially waging psychological warfare. You have to fight back with truth. Russell clicked to the next slide in his presentation, showing a timeline of Brinley's escalating manipulation. Notice the pattern. Small lies that seem insignificant, followed by larger accusations, followed by systematic attempts to isolate me from support systems. This is textbook psychological abuse, and it follows predictable patterns. A man in the back row spoke up. What about the technology side? How do we protect ourselves from digital manipulation? Russell nodded to Darian, who'd volunteered to help with the program. His cousin stood and addressed the group. Digital evidence is everything now. Text messages, emails, browser histories, financial records, they all tell stories. But manipulative people will try to use technology against you, creating false evidence while destroying real evidence. Darian pulled up examples on his laptop. Spoofed text messages, edited photos, fake social media posts. It's easier than ever to fabricate digital evidence. But it's also easier than ever to detect fakery if you know what to look for. After the presentation, Russell stayed to talk with individual attendees. Many were survivors themselves, sharing stories that echoed his own experience with chilling similarity. A young veteran approached him as the crowd was dispersing. "Sir, I think my wife might be planning something. She's been asking about my life insurance, claiming I said things I never said, telling people I'm unstable." Russell handed him a business card. "Call this number tomorrow. We'll help you document everything and connect you with resources. Don't wait until it escalates." The veteran nodded gratefully and left. Russell packed up his presentation materials, thinking about how many people were living the nightmare he'd survived. Ashline had helped over 300 people in its first 2 years of operation. Victims of gaslighting, financial fraud, and psychological manipulation. People who'd been told they were crazy until they started to believe it themselves. That Russell's phone buzzed with a text from Myra. "Daddy, when are you coming home? I made cookies." He smiled and typed back, "On my way, sweetheart." The drive from Phoenix to Prescott took Russell through desert landscape that gradually gave way to pine forest. He'd bought 10 acres outside the city, enough space for Myra to explore safely and for him to build the workshop he'd always wanted. Their house was modest but comfortable, with large windows that let in natural light and a deck that overlooked the mountains. Nothing like the sterile perfection of their old home in Flagstaff. Myra met him at the front door, flour in her hair and chocolate chips on her face. "I made snickerdoodles and chocolate chip, and something that was supposed to be oatmeal raisin, but I forgot the oatmeal." Russell hugged her and lifted her off the ground. "Sound perfect. Did you save any for me?" "Most of them. I only ate 3. Okay, 5. Maybe 7. They sat on the deck eating cookies and watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and pink. Myra chattered about her day at school, her friends, her plans for the weekend. She was 8 now, taller and more confident than the frightened child who'd whispered warnings about footsteps in the night. Therapy had helped her process the trauma of her mother's betrayal, but mostly she seemed relieved to live in a house where truth was the default. "Daddy," she said, finishing her 3rd cookie. "Mrs. Henderson at school says you're famous because you caught a bad guy." "I'm not famous. I just did what I had to do to keep us safe." "She says you're a hero." Russell considered this. Heroes don't let bad things happen in the first place. I just clean up a mess after it was made. Myra leaned against his shoulder. I think you're a hero anyway. Later that night, after Myra was asleep, Russell sat in his workshop reviewing applications for the Ashline program. Each application represented someone trapped in the same web of lies and manipulation he'd escaped. Some stories were worse than his. Some were just beginning. All of them deserved help. Russell approved funding for 5 new cases and scheduled training sessions for 3 more survivor advocates. The work was hard, emotionally draining, but necessary. He turned off his computer and walked to the house. In her bedroom, Myra was sleeping peacefully, her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm and her latest drawing propped against the nightstand. The drawing showed a tall tree with a tire swing, a small girl with dark hair, and a man standing guard nearby. At the bottom, in her careful second-grade handwriting, she'd written one word: safe. Russell woke to the sound of rain on the roof and Myra singing in the kitchen. 3 years had passed since Brinley's conviction, and their life in Prescott had settled into comfortable routines that felt like safety made tangible. He found his daughter making pancakes, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she flipped them with more enthusiasm than skill. Morning, chef. How many casualties so far? Only 2. And they're not casualties, they're practice pancakes. Myra gestured to 2 charred circles on a plate. The rest are perfect. Russell examined her work. The pancakes were uneven and slightly burnt, but made with love and independence he'd never take for granted. Perfect, he agreed, accepting a plate stacked high with her creations. They ate breakfast while rain drummed against the windows. Myra described her plans for the day art projects, reading, maybe building a blanket fort if the weather stayed bad. Normal childhood activities in a normal house where the biggest danger was running out of maple syrup. After breakfast, Russell went to his workshop to work on a new tactical vest design, while Myra settled in the living room with her art supplies. The Ashline program had grown into a full-time organization with offices in Phoenix and Tucson, but Russell still maintained his gear business for law enforcement and military contractors. Both careers felt like extensions of the same mission, protecting people who stood between civilians and danger. Around noon, Myra appeared in his workshop doorway, holding a canvas board and paint-stained fingers. I finished my painting. Want to see? She turned the canvas around, revealing a scene that made Russell's breath catch in his throat. A large tree dominated the center, its branches strong and protective. A small girl sat on a tire swing hanging from one branch, her face bright with joy. And standing nearby, watching over them both, was a tall figure that looked unmistakably like Russell. But it was the background that captured the painting's emotional truth. Where another child might have painted houses or flowers, Myra had painted walls strong, solid barriers that kept the dangerous world to be a YAT the bottom of the canvas. In her neat 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written a single word: safe. Russell knelt down to her level. It's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that how you feel? Safe. Every day. Myra pointed to the painted figure standing guard. Because you're watching out for us. Always, Russell promised. No matter what. Myra hugged him with paint-sticky fingers, and Russell felt the last of his war wounds finally heal. Not the physical scars from Afghanistan, those would always remain. But the deeper injury inflicted by betrayal and broken trust had closed completely. They hung the painting in the living room, where it joined a gallery of Myra's artwork that chronicled their life together. Pictures of their house, their hiking adventures, their quiet moments of contentment, in shadows in any of the drawings. No hidden figures or whispered threats. Just a father and daughter building a life founded on truth and protected by vigilance. That evening, Russell sat on their deck reading while Myra practiced violin inside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cool. Stars were beginning to appear between breaking clouds. His phone buzzed with a text from Lenora. Brinley's latest appeal was denied. Final decision. She'll serve every day of her sentence. Russell typed back, "Good." He deleted the message thread and put his phone away. Brinley belonged to the past, a cautionary tale he shared with Ashline audiences, but no longer a presence in his daily thoughts. The future was what mattered now. Myra's education, the Ashline program's expansion, the simple pleasure of watching his daughter grow into the confident young woman she was becoming. Russell listened to her violin practice through the open window, a simple melody she'd learned that week, played with more determination than skill. Like her pancakes, like her paintings, like everything she did, it was imperfect but genuine, authentic in a way that Brinley had never been. When Myra finished practicing, she joined him on the deck with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Daddy," she said, settling into the chair beside him, "do you ever miss the old house?" Russell considered the question. "I miss some things about it. The workshop was bigger. The view of the mountains was different, but not really miss it. No, not really." Russell looked at his daughter, so serious and thoughtful. "This is home now. This is where we belong." Myra nodded and sipped her hot chocolate. "I like it better here. It feels more real." More real. At 8 years old, Myra had captured something that Russell was still learning to articulate. Their old life had been built on foundations of lies and manipulation. This new life was constructed from truth, brick by brick. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the clearing sky. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called across the forest. Night sounds that spoke of wildness and peace in equal measure. "Time for bed, sweetheart. 5 more minutes. 5 more minutes." Russell pulled a blanket around his daughter's shoulders and continued watching the stars. 5 minutes became 10, then 20, but he didn't mind. These moments of peace were hard-earned and worth protecting. Eventually, Myra fell asleep in her chair. Russell carried her inside and tucked her into bed, the same ritual he'd performed 1,000 times before. But now it carried no undertone of fear, no whispered warnings about footsteps in the night, just a father putting his daughter to bed in a house where safety was real and love was honest. Russell turned off the lights and walked through their home, checking locks and setting the security system. Old habits from his military days, but also practical precautions for a man who'd learned that evil could wear a familiar face in his bedroom. He looked out at the forest surrounding their property. Miles of pine and aspen, mountains and sky, space enough to breathe and grow without interference from the past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Ashline cases to review, gear designs to complete, the constant work of building a life worth living. But tonight, his daughter was safe in her bed, his home was secure, and the future stretched ahead with possibility. Russell fell asleep to the sound of wind in the trees and rain beginning again on the roof. Natural sounds in a natural world, far from the artificial perfection of manipulation and lies. In the morning, he'd wake to Myra's singing and another day of the life they'd built together. A life founded on truth, protected by vigilance, and made beautiful by the simple fact that they'd survived. The war was over. They'd won. And in a house surrounded by forest, with his daughter's painting declaring their safety in careful letters, Russell Cain finally found peace.